So is this the video that I was planning to make today? No, it was not. Is this the video I am making? Yes, it is, because frankly, I feel like I've gotten a couple comments lately on my most popular video actually. Do you know what it is? But my most popular video. And on some recent shorts that I put up. And I feel like I need to clear the air about a particular topic. Hello, my name is Carrie. This is Carrie Craftgeek. This is my space on the internet where I talk about making pretty things with pretty string, normally with 2 sticks. And I am what I would call an English style knitter. I'm an English style knitter in the sense that I tension my yarn in my right hand. There has been a lot of, I would say, propaganda. I would call it propaganda, but messaging, common wisdom that if you want to be a fast, efficient knitter with good ergonomics, the only way you can do that is if you learn to knit Continental. And if somebody who knits with yarn in their right hand goes online and is like, how can I be a faster knitter? You will get comment after comment after comment after comment after comment after comment, comments all the way down of learn to knit Continental. And as I say this, there's some sarcasm in my voice, and not because I'm bashing Continental knitting. There's sarcasm in my voice because even though that is definitely a route you can take, and many have taken that route and had great success and are very happy being Continental knitters, it is not the only way you can knit quickly and efficiently with yarn in your right hand. The fastest knitter in the world knits with yarn held in her right hand. But I would say some of my advocacy for English style knitting has left some believing that I am bashing Continental knitters. Or despite video evidence, how I knit is slow. And honestly, no hate to either of these commenters. I think one is just a miscommunication and the other is based on misinformation. So grab a project, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let's just clear the air about Continental versus English style knitting. All right, so I'm gonna be honest, like I said, I didn't really plan to shoot this video today. I'm really gonna just be speaking from my heart and on instinct, but let's start off with first, what am I working on today? What is on my needles? So what I am working on right now is this. This is the Playdate Tee by Needles and Life. If you have been following my channel, you might remember I did a podcast where I talked about doing the Playdate Tee, and that was the kid size version. I knit it for my daughter for her first day of school. It is adorable on her. Oh my God, I have to wash it, whatever. But I loved the project so much. I am now making my own Playdate Tee for myself. So this is what I've been working on. This is a top down in the round sweater with raglan shaping, and the raglan shaping is done with these eyelets, which is so adorable. I am now past splitting for the sleeves, and I am now just knitting the body, and I got a ways to go because the pattern is actually designed to be more of a crop t-shirt, but I just don't have that body anymore. I passed those years. I'm past the crop top years of life, and so I'm going to be knitting this a little bit longer for myself. But I will have all the details of the pattern, the materials that I'm using down in the description box if you are interested in them. Some of these will have clearly marked affiliate links, so if you use any of my links to do some shopping, I might earn a small commission, and this does help support my channel. So if you utilize one of my affiliate links, or you leave me a tip through Buy Me a Coffee or a YouTube Super Thanks, thank you so much. It is so greatly appreciated. It really does help me keep this channel going. But I'm just gonna knit a little bit, and then let's just jump into this. Let's start clearing the air on this topic. 75 years ago, at the turn of the millennium, when I first started learning how to knit, okay, I would say in the US, the predominant method of knitting was English style knitting or American style knitting, where you tension the yarn in your right hand. But there was a growing movement towards continental knitting. Elizabeth Zimmerman's books were very influential, and she had argued that continental knitting was faster and more efficient. You were seeing a lot of classes come on about knit faster with continental knitting, and there were debates even then. Oh, those many, many decades ago now, it seems like. A whole different world. But there were debates even then about what was the right way to knit. And I would say that because English knitting was so predominant at that time, you certainly had continental knitters who experienced the knitting police saying, oh, that's not the right way to knit. Oh, you're doing it wrong. And that was crappy. Okay, let's just be honest. It was crappy. It was crappy when English style knitters would tell continental knitters, oh, you're doing it wrong, right? However, I think the pendulum has swung so far in the other direction, right? Where now I think that there's this consensus or this general view that continental knitting with yarn in your left hand, is the superior method, that you now have some vocal, continental knitters who look at English style knitting and frankly are kind of snobby about it, who sit there and go, oh, English style knitting is so inefficient, it's so slow. I literally had somebody once on another platform say to me that why would you knit English style knitting? It's like using dial-up for internet. My channel, part of the reason that it exists, and I am unapologetic about this, and it'll be part of the reason my channel exists for as long as I have this YouTube channel and I'm knitting, is to advocate for English style knitting. And not at the and I want to be very clear at that. When I say advocate for English style knitting, it is not to advocate for it at the expense of another way of knitting. Not at all. It is more to encourage the people who prefer this way of knitting with yarn in their right hand that you are a great knitter too, that your method is a great knitter, is a great method as well. And you don't need to be apologetic about it. You don't need to feel like you're doomed to be a slow knitter because you can't, knit continental, or you choose that you don't want to knit continental. Somebody who doesn't want to knit continental is not a less skilled knitter. They just have a different way of knitting. And the opposite is also true. Someone who loves knitting continental, like, you're a great knitter too. Continental, there's a lot of advantages to continental knitting. There's some cons as well. There are advantages to knitting with yarn in your right hand. There are advantages to Portuguese style knitting. All of these methods of knitting have their pros and their cons, and it only comes down to which one's advantages outweigh the disadvantages for you. I have this book, all right? This is Knitting Comfortably, the Ergonomics of Hand Knitting. If you want to learn more about how muscle works and everything, this is I would call it a textbook, but it's written by Carson Demers. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he is in fact a physical therapist, and he has written this, what I think is probably the quintessential book on how to knit with good ergonomics. And one of the things that I love about this book is that he talks about the ergonomics of knitting for all styles of knitting. It's not like you open up this book and he's like, the best way, the most ergonomic way to knit is continental. No, he does not. In fact, he talks about knitting style. Everything we've covered to this point about forceful exertion is found in any and all knitting, regardless of your preferred knitting style. Forceful exertion in terms of needle choice, yarn choice, and stitch formation impacts all knitters, no matter how they hold the yarn or form stitches. Each knitting style has its own ergonomic challenges and benefits. More important, No style is inherently better or worse. The best style for you is whichever one reduces your exposure to forceful exertion and indeed to all risk factors. So if you are interested in this book and learning more about the ergonomics of things and how to knit more comfortably, like, this is a really great book to take a look at. But I just wanted to bring it out and show it because I wanted to just explain that all styles of knitting have their challenges and their benefits, as Mr. Demers says, and I think we just need to stop trying to prove that one way of knitting is better than another way of knitting. And again, the purpose of my channel is not to tell you English style knitting is better than continental style knitting, because I don't think that's objectively true. It's more of, these are the reasons I prefer English style knitting, and these are the things that I have found that help make this style of knitting faster and more efficient if you want to apply any of that to you as a knitter. I guess some of my concern is that if somebody who knits with yarn in their right hand goes online and asks, how can I knit faster? And they are only told, learn to knit continental, we start losing the knowledge of how to knit efficiently as somebody holding their yarn in their right hand. So I think it's important that it's like, if somebody is coming on and saying, I'm an English style knitter, how can I be a faster knitter? Like that they have somebody there who tells them, you don't have to learn continental if you don't want to, or if you tried it and it's not for you, you are not doomed to be a slow knitter. You can in fact take how you knit already and make adjustments so that you're more proficient at it. One thing that I generally believe is that speed in knitting is really a byproduct of experience and proficiency. And that's really how I have gained speed in my knitting over the years, is just practice and becoming more efficient in my movements and becoming more proficient in how I knit. And the big advantage of making adjustments to the way that you already knit is you don't have to learn a whole new way of knitting. Look, I am very aware of how difficult it is to make adjustments to how you knit, because over 25 years of knitting, how I knit now is very different than how I knitted when I first started. I have learned different styles of knitting. Like I always say, I can knit continental, I can knit Portuguese, I can knit obviously English style. I usually knit with an underhand grip in a more supported knitting style, aka lever knitting. However, sometimes when I'm knitting, I switch my method and I go overhand for various reasons. There's very few ways of knitting that I can't do if I put my mind to it. If you want to go down that journey, I highly actually encourage you to do it, because I think it's good for everybody to know how to learn more than one way to knit. I would encourage continental knitters to learn how to knit English style just so you know another way of knitting. And I would encourage English style knitters to learn continental so that you know another way of knitting. But when you learn a whole new different way of knitting, it feels awkward and fumbly and weird when you first start, right? And when you totally change the way you knit from one style to another, all the proficiency that you gained, well, I shouldn't say all, a lot of the proficiency that you gained in one style of knitting gets thrown out the window, right? Whereas if you make adjustments to how you currently knit to gain speed and efficiency, you're building on top of a foundation. And that can be far more approachable than simply learn how to knit continental. One last thing I want to deconstruct a little bit in this video is the notion that proof that continental style knitting is better is how many people switch to continental knitting and like it so much better, right? And I think there's like a certain survivorship bias in that sort of anecdotal evidence. Yes, there are a lot of people who start off learning how to knit with yarn in their right hand, learn how to knit with yarn in their left hand and prefer that and like, oh, I wish I learned how to knit this way from the beginning. And I am not here to invalidate that experience. If that is your experience, that is wonderful. I'm very happy that you found the way of knitting that has kept you knitting, right? However, there are a lot of people, plenty of people who try continental knitting and they don't like it. And they learn how to knit the knit stitch, and that's fine. But then they get to the purl stitch and they hate it, and they hate purling. But for those people, one or two things tend to happen. They find another way to knit, like, you know, English style knitting or Portuguese knitting, or they just give up on knitting. And I don't want somebody to give up on knitting when if they had just tried another method, might have worked for them. And I'm just gonna say this. I don't think on my channel I have ever bashed continental knitters as a group. If I bashed continental knitters as a group, I apologize. But I don't think I've ever done that. I don't even think I've bashed continental knitting. I have criticized, I wouldn't even say criticized, I have pointed out disadvantages to continental knitting, for sure. I've also in my channel pointed out the disadvantages of how I knit, because there are disadvantages. And the point is so that people can make an informed decision on what they want to try in their knitting life. What I want is for those continental knitters who feel the need to bash English style knitting to not. And to understand that the method that you're using is wonderful and great for you. That doesn't mean it's going to be the answer for everybody. And that people who choose to stick with knitting with yarn in their right hand are not knitting in a lesser way. It is not a less efficient or a bad way or an inferior way of knitting. And I just think that we really should focus more on community over competition, which means like we can have respectful conversations about the pros and cons of different ways of knitting without it devolving into flexing on each other. Because I feel like sometimes that's what this is trying to flex on one another. I think we just need to bring this back to center and everybody recognize that all forms of knitting are valid. You know, that we are part of a wonderful history and tradition stretching back centuries. We are the inheritors of men and women of times gone by who made knitted garments, and we are now the caretakers of this craft. And so let's take care of each other and support one another and make sure that no matter how you knit, that person has resources, good resources, in order to improve the proficiency with the method that they choose to knit with. I hope that makes sense. I got maybe a little grand here, but that is truly how I feel. But I would love to hear from you down in the comments, and we can have a whole conversation about this, about different styles of knitting and what works for everybody and why that may be. But if we're gonna have that conversation, let's make sure that we are not insulting another way of knitting, all right? Because it's time that we bring the pendulum to the middle. That is it for me today. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, got something useful out of it. And if so, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your other knitting friends. Liking, sharing, commenting on videos are all great ways that help support my channel and grow this space so I can stay here on YouTube. Of course, the bestest, freest way that you can support my channel is just hit subscribe and the notification bell. And if you'd like to take your support just a little bit further, you please consider leaving me a super thanks or utilizing one of my affiliate links. Thank you so much again for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you might be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye. I realized I probably should have worn a different scarf because I'm realizing the color, this is mauve, this is called mauve, is very similar to the dusty kind of pink in my scarf, but oh well, it'll be fine. But there was another reason I really wanted to start the YouTube channel. And that reason was when I first learning, I got this comment that I will put up here for you to read on my video on lever knitting. Now that lever knitting, that's kind of everything I wanted to say about it.